Right. Hey, Scott, good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me, as always.
Of course. Hey, Scott, good to have you with us. There's Jennifer. I knew she was around somewhere.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Chris, you give me the go sign when it's 1:30.
All right, very good. We're about a minute away. See a few folks coming in here, so we are close.
Good. Good.
And Terry Bowers, Bill, you may see, is manning our public comment line. So when it comes time to call for public comment, you can just
Great.
ask her if anybody's there. I don't believe anybody is, but that's who you'll go to.
Okay. Thanks, Terry.
Just click to 1:30. I see David's logging in and a few other folks. Let's give it another, at least another 30 seconds or so. I'll give you the okay in a minute here.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and close the door. I'm not at my home office today, so.
So Bill Johnson's logging in. Once he's in, I think we're good to go.
Great.
All right, Bill is there and it's 1:31. So Chairman Roberts, you can begin whenever you'd like.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, it's 1:30-ish. I'd like to call this meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for TBARTA to order. And Jennifer, if you'd be kind enough to call the roll, please.
Sure. Bob Henyon. Actually, he's not going to be joining us today. He did send an email.
Okay,
Bill Roberts.
here.
Bob Widmer.
Present.
Lynn Gruber White.
Here.
Josh Frank.
Present.
Richard Bedford. Richard Balcom.
Present.
Travis Norton.
Present.
Leonardo DeSoritz. Bill Johnson.
Present.
Rick Richmond.
Here.
Rob Serku.
Here.
David Goodwin.
Here.
Karen Mullins.
Here.
Karen Schwartz.
Here.
And Sarah Calhoun. Okay, we can go ahead and proceed.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jennifer. Since we are not in person and we don't have any action items today, I don't think we don't have a quorum. So we'll just go ahead and move forward with the consent agenda items, which are the October and December meeting minutes. Let me see if anyone has any comments or corrections on them. Any comments on the minute?
I did receive one from Bill Johnson via email, which I will make.
Okay.
Move to accept the minutes as amended.
Okay. Let me ask Chris Jadek, we really can't take any action without a physical quorum present, is that right?
I was on the understanding that the formal adoption of the minutes would have to happen at a physical meeting at some point, based on current statute. Although I'm not an
Right.
attorney, but that's my understanding.
That's my understanding as well. Let me just ask for all those in favor of approving the minutes as corrected by Bill Johnson, please say aye, and we'll take formal action at the next meeting. Say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right. And Jennifer, if you'll then put that on the agenda next time, we'll hopefully have a quorum.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The next item is our presentations. The Transit and Telework
Mr. Chairman,
survey. Yes.
if you could ask for public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did skip that. So Terry, is there anyone signed up for public comment?
At this time, we do not have anyone that wishes to make a public comment.
Okay, thank you. Let the record show we asked and no one was available. Now we'll move into the Transit and Telework survey results. Chris?
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here and we'll get underway. We conducted a survey. I'm going to go to the next screen here so I give you a little overview of this. Our Transit and Telework survey, the first 3 months of this year, we launched it just after New Year's. It wrapped up on March 31st. The reason for this was as we were communicating the results of the Vision 2030 RTDP, at one point in a presentation to, I think it was the Pinellas County Commissioners, question came up, what does the business community think of the RTDP since it's supposed to improve economic vitality in our region? And we really hadn't asked the business community, but from that we decided, well, it's easy enough for us internally to launch this survey, but we wanted to expand it beyond whether the business community was accepting of the RTDP results. We knew there was an opportunity to find out a little bit more about how we were all dealing with the pandemic. So we had questions on telework experience to both business and the public, transit experience, what transit experience is expected to be like after the pandemic, and what TBARTA's role should be in future regional transit. I'm going to walk through some of those questions here today. I will emphasize this is a non-scientific survey. It's convenient sampling across 5 counties, which means we did as much outreach as we could with no budget, using a lot of government communications, our own internal communications to say, hey, we want to know what you think about transit and telework and what TBARTA's role should be to get as many people in as we possibly could. And we ended up with 549 responses. And the results you're going to see are rounded to the nearest percentage. So any of you out there who are good at math may find out these don't always add up to 100%. That's why we rounded them up or down. First of all, we asked people, where do you live? The majority lived in Hillsborough County. That's a little bit higher than Hillsborough County's representation in the 5-county area that we have. Pinellas County, a close second, not close, but a strong second at 22%. And there were a few people outside of the area, but for the most part, most of the respondents were in our 5-county area. And then we also wanted to know where they worked. And here we saw a majority of people worked in Hillsborough County. Very few people who took the survey in Hillsborough County actually left Hillsborough County to work. But you can see, whereas Pinellas County, 11% of people worked in Pinellas County, but 22% of the respondents lived in Pinellas. So just a small indication that Hillsborough County is more of a magnet for employment, at least among the people who took this survey. We also broke it out between business and non-business people and had a pretty nice split of folks. We asked, do you lead or manage employees? And some of the questions I'm going to walk you through today are going to show you what business thinks of transit telework and what everyone else thinks. There's not a lot of difference, but we wanted to see if there was. And 44% of those who responded said they were in some managerial capacity. And of that, we asked them to specify then, what is your role? And you can see 10% business owners, 11% executive leadership, 19% identified themselves as senior leadership, and 45% identified themselves as management. And so the next series of questions I'm going to walk through right now are the responses from that business leadership group across 5 counties. One of the first questions was, prior to the pandemic, how many of your employees teleworked? Understandably, not too many had a lot of telework. If you add up 59 and 18%, the top 2 bars there, nearly 80% had less than 5% of their employees telework, and 60%, nearly 60% said they never asked for any telework. But then during the pandemic, how many of your employees teleworked? And you can see what we expected, a big switch. 64% said their employees were teleworking more than 50% of the time. The none category, which was 9, certainly you can attribute that to service sector, hospital workers, people like that who really can't telework. But there was a fair amount of telework, and this reflects the trends we've heard about around the country. Then we wanted to know, okay, so how did you like it? How did the telework experience work for you? And among business leaders, for the most part, it was positive. 53% said they had a positive telework experience. And that line there, which you can't see everything, the further description was employees were more productive than we expected. So 53% said, yeah, it was better. It worked out better than we expected. 29% said employees were just as productive as we expected them to be. And 6% negative, they said actually employees were less productive than we expected them to be. So from that, we wanted to know, what will your future telework policy be? We suspected that there will be more teleworking moving forward here. And certainly the results of this survey confirm that. 60% of the business leaders said they are going to permit more teleworking than they did prior to the pandemic. We're not measuring what their telework policy is now, but we wanted to know, did the pandemic and the experience you have change how you're going to manage telework in the future? 11% said we're going to go back to the same policy as before the pandemic. 7% said less. And about 1 out of 5 said they really don't know. They're still going to make that decision moving forward. Then we asked similar questions to employees to see how well they possibly synced up. If you weren't management, we still wanted to know what your telework experience was. Did you like it? Did it work out well? So first, we asked, prior to this pandemic, how often did you telework? Nearly 3 out of 4 said they never teleworked. But you do have, interestingly, 10% of those who replied said they were already teleworking more than 50% of the time. During the pandemic, how often did you telework? This certainly reflects what we heard from the business leaders. The bar at the bottom, nearly 3 out of 4 were teleworking more than 50% of the time. And of course, the never bar at the top of 12%, we again attribute that to service sector and employees who obviously could not telework. So then we asked, what was your telework experience? And we found the results were similar to what business leaders were telling us. 58% said it was positive. And again, what we asked was, were you more productive than you expected to be? And 58% said yes, they were more productive than they expected. 28% were neutral. And 5% did not have a positive experience. They actually said they had a negative telework experience, with 11% having no opinion. So we wanted to know what they're thinking their organization's future telework policy will be after the pandemic. Much like business leaders say they're going to permit more, employees expect that there's going to be a more liberal telework policy. More than half responded saying they're going to permit more telework than they did before. But a few employees, 4%, indicate that they expect their organizations to actually provide less telework experience, which, while not a big number, is very interesting. Telework was not positive for every organization that used it, and we see that reflected in a small number of both business leaders and employees. We then asked a couple of questions about mass transit and about alternative transportation, such as carpooling, biking, walking, things like that. First, regarding the use of mass transit, most likely being bus routes, we asked, prior to the pandemic, how often do you use mass transit? Not surprising, most people do not use mass transit regularly. 88% say that they do not, but 6% of those who responded said they are using mass transit or were before the pandemic, more than 50% of the time. After the pandemic, how will you use mass transit? We want to see, are trends going to change? And it doesn't appear that we saw a lot here. 7% say they'll use it more, but 60% say they will use mass transit the same as they used it before. And to clarify that question, the question says, I will use mass transit the same as before, even if I did not use it. So those who did not use mass transit would check this box and say, yeah, I haven't used it before and I'm not going to use it moving forward. Nothing's changed. And 4% of the folks said that they would use it less. Interestingly, a third of the folks said they don't know right now. And I think a lot of that might have to do with future telework policies. There's a lot of uncertainty as to when people are going to be going back to work. So I think there's uncertainty into how they're going to get back and forth, or if they need to get back and forth, based on what future telework policies may be. We asked a similar question about alternative transportation. And as you know, TBARTA is very big in advocating for vanpools, carpools, biking and walking. So we asked prior to the pandemic, how did you use alternative transportation? 79% do not. They probably drive by themselves. But 5% said they were using it more than 50% of the time. And then you can see some of the other numbers there. 2% used it maybe one or two times a week. And 10% of the folks would use it maybe once every 10 days or so. So there's a fair amount of alternative transportation use. We wanted to know, is that going to change because of the pandemic? And the answer pretty much is no. Some people are going to use it a little bit more. Some people are going to use it less, but you can see those numbers, 6% more, 7% less, really about the same. Once again, there is a fair amount of uncertainty. About 1 in 4 aren't quite sure. We think there's an opportunity here to expand our van pool program. That's one reason you may have seen there's concurrently, we have a media outreach campaign with billboards, and we're about to start a social media campaign promoting more van pooling, because we think as commuter habits are changing, there may be some folks perhaps in this 27% number here who are open or considering carpools, van pools, and we want to make sure they know what TBARTA can offer them. Then we moved into the final part of the survey, and we wanted to ask about regional transit and what TBARTA's role should be. Is there support for TBARTA taking a leadership role when it comes to developing regional transit that can complement what our local governments are doing? And we started off by asking, how do you think things are going? How do you think the Tampa Bay's economy ranks compared to other regions around the country? And we get some pretty strong rankings. Nearly 50% say it's either much better than average or better than average. That's the 10%, and 39% you see there added up together. And then 33% say it's average. So really only about 11% rated as below average or well below average, with a handful of people also saying they don't know. So the economy gets pretty favorable marks. Then we asked about the transportation system. This isn't the transit system, but transportation being probably highways, bridges, airports, things like that. How do you rate our transportation system compared to other regions around the country? The results are not quite as favorable, certainly a little bit on the negative side. If you take a look at the well above average and the well below average, you can see there's a difference there, 3% to 22%. A fair number of people give it average marks, and 32% say below average. So you could say, if I add those numbers up, 54% are saying that our transportation system is either below average or well below average. And then we wanted to ask about public transit, and the numbers erode even more. When it comes to our buses, public transit, how we get around, how do you rate our public transit system? And the big orange bar down there, 42% say that we are well below average. And when you combine that with the below average number, you come up with a number of 65%. That's just about 2/3 of the respondents say that our public transit system is below average or well below average. And I'll emphasize that these numbers are everybody. These are business leaders. These are folks who are not business leaders. As you can see, 472 people answered this question. So these are results of all respondents in the survey. We then wanted to ask about regional transit. So do you see an opportunity for regional transit to be valued here? Do you think Tampa Bay would benefit from increased regional transit regardless of the mode? And that regardless of the mode qualifier there is important because, as you know, some people are very big on rail. And of course, we're promoting bus rapid transit, and you've got ferries, and you've got a lot of different ideas out there on. We just wanted to know, when it comes to should we have more regional transit, don't worry about what the mode might be right now, but do you want more? And you can see very strongly agree, more than half, 55% believe that Tampa Bay, our 5-county region, would benefit from increased regional transit, and 27% agree. So together, that's more than 80%. 82% either agree or strongly agree that we would benefit from regional transit. Do you think that improved regional transit would increase economic opportunity for workers? Again, very strong numbers, 84% either strongly agree or also agree. And as you know, that is the cornerstone for a lot of what TBARTA advocates. It's to improve the quality of life for our residents, workers, and visitors, but really by improving economic opportunity and connections to jobs. We know that we increase the quality of life here. And it appears that those who answered this survey agree with us in that approach, that increased regional transit will increase economic opportunity for workers. We then moved into talking about some specifics regarding TBARTA and our Envision 2030 plan. the question, if you took the survey, the survey had a little more detail saying, hey, Envision 2030 is TBARTA's regional transit development plan. It's unfunded as a regional plan. What priority do you place on increased investment in regional transit? Should we put more money toward this? High priority, nearly half the people said it needs to be a high priority, and 16% on top of that say it should be the highest priority. So very strong marks. 1 in 4 say average priority, and a few folks say low priority or lowest priority, but certainly the majority of people agree that there should be increased investment in regional transit in our area. We then started asking a few questions specifically about TBARTA as a regional entity, and how important is it for one agency, such as TBARTA, to lead regional transit planning in cooperation with FDOT, county governments, MPOs, and local transit agencies. Very important while we put that qualifier at the end, because we're increasingly want people to know TBARTA is here to complement and to solve local problems. Regional transit is not here to supplant all the other initiatives we have. Regional transit is here to enhance what our localities are trying to deal with at the local level. So important for us to emphasize that we are going to lead regional transit planning, but we're doing it in cooperation with those localities that have their own problems. As you can see, again, very strong support, extremely important, nearly about almost 30%, very important, 44%. Once again, a lot of support for TBARTA as an entity to lead regional transit planning. We then asked how important is it for one agency to expand and operate regional transit, again, in cooperation with our local governments. As you can see, 29% say it's extremely important, 43% very important, 18% were neutral on it, and a few folks were opposed. But again, very in favor of TBARTA leading that planning and also leading the expansion and operation of regional transit. And then finally, we asked, should the state of Florida provide dedicated budget support for TBARTA to expand regional transit? As you know, this is a key requirement for us, but nearly 75%, nearly 3 in 4 people who responded to this survey say it's extremely important or very important for the state of Florida to support TBARTA with a dedicated budget. But one item I will add here is that we saw very strong support in Hillsborough County. I don't have time to show all those slides, but we can break out the people who said, I live in Hillsborough County. And in some of our analysis, we would break those out. There are more than 300 people from Hillsborough County. And when we looked at these questions saying, how important is it to have more regional transit? How important is it for TBARTA to operate and lead that charge? We found very strong support in Hillsborough County, nearly identical to what we found in the outlying counties, which was certainly encouraging because we know sometimes Hillsborough County may not see things the same way as the other counties do. And of course, we are a regional entity that has to meet the needs of all our counties and find a consensus among them. But it was good to see that there was a consensus among both those who live and work in Hillsborough County saying they support regional transit initiatives, and those who are in the other 4 outlying counties. We saw support across the board for that. So those are a few of those slides. I hope you found those interesting. If you took the survey, and I know a lot of you did, thank you for that. I know a lot of you also posted it on your social media pages, and you really helped us get the word out there. Getting more than 500 responses was very encouraging. It's only a convenient sample, but the more you have, if we only had a couple hundred responses to this, I don't know what the results would have been, but they're certainly not as strong as when you get 500 responses. And so I want to thank all the CAC members, not only who took it, but also did their part in spreading the word, because I think that's one reason we had such strong response to the survey. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I am open to any questions.
Good, Chris. Thanks very much. I think it is telling that you got a lot of responses. 500 responses is pretty good. I found it interesting that there were a number of responses that skipped over some of the middle questions, but then as you got toward the end with more specific questions about transit and TBARTA in particular, the number of skipped responses dropped dramatically. So I think you piqued some interest there.
I will give you a little, let me give you a little explanation on why that is. So the survey branched you off. You notice that very early slide said, are you management or are you not management? And about, it was about a 40-60 split. So when you saw a lot of those middle questions where it was skipped, that was because those might be business, we asked employees, what was your telework experience? The 200 people who were business leaders weren't asked that question. So they didn't skip it themselves. The survey jumped them ahead, so they didn't answer the question. So just so you have a full understanding as to why you saw so many skipped in the middle, that was why.
Okay, good. Good to know. Questions of Chris from the committee members?
I think Rick Richmond has his hand raised.
Rick, go ahead. You're recognized.
Hi, thank you, Bill. Great survey, and I will say on those three categories, very encouraging. All three categories where TBARTA is mentioned, 70+%. So that's really great. One question I have though, and this comes up from time to time, so just curious with staff's thoughts. These are non-scientific, and the sample size is kind of directed in a non-scientific way. How can we better administer some of these surveys so that consensus, when we're building consensus, the argument isn't used against the survey methodology, against, how do we know that that's true, or those type of things? I like to just hear that because it comes up from time to time.
No, we've talked about it internally. We actually considered it in the Envision 2030 plan, but it just didn't fit in the budget. There are firms that do this, and you need budget money for it. If we had dollars to spend on a scientific study, we could. I say, look, this is a conversation starter, this survey, and we're very fully aware that we're not making any policy based on this. We wouldn't advise any policy, but to the extent that it might open up some observations, hey, there was some negative telework experience. Maybe that was unexpected. I don't know. Maybe that needs further exploration. But to your point, Rick, if we have a budget dollars that can be put towards something like that, if we thought there was a need, there's certainly firms out there that can do that. We kicked the tires on that in our Envision 2030 plan, but actually chose to use those very precious dollars on some other planning initiatives. And even though we did a couple of surveys, we did not take the scientific approach because the budgetary expenditure just didn't line up with some other needs there. So it can be done. It just needs some dollars. No,
and I understand. I didn't at all. My comment wasn't, didn't want to belittle the effort or anything, because I do realize that there are budget constraints. I was just more curious, what is the difference in a budget? What does that look like from an agency to may want to pursue that? And that's kind of the context I was going. So I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you.
No, great job.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Rich.
Bob's raised his
Karen?
hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Nice job. I thought it was very positive. Of course, since so many were from Hillsborough, that mass transit thing, not so much, and the alternatives, I think that's more or less understandable. And rating the Tampa Bay transit system below average and well below, I think speaks volumes.
Hi, is this Lenny?
Hold on a second. Continue on.
Okay, as Rich pointed out, all of a sudden, the end of it, where how important is TBARTA, and should it be leading this? I was frankly surprised. I mean, I don't know how much street cred TBARTA has yet. I mean, most of the people I talked to, you work for who? But I thought that was great. And not only surveys, but I was a big fan of focus groups. And I think maybe if that's one of the tasks you wanted to give to the CAC members to host some of these, that might be something to consider in the future.
All right.
Great job.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions of Chris or comments about the survey? Chris, I don't see hands.
I don't either. I think
Okay.
everyone has spoken.
Good. Well, thank you for that very interesting survey. And I would echo Bob Whitmer's comment that, if you have the budget available, these surveys are always valuable, and focus groups also get you a lot of unanticipated feedback. So good
Right.
job.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda for the committee is an RRT update. And I asked Scott to join us today. Scott Pringle, you got the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for having me at the meeting. I'm going to give a quick update on what we'll be doing for the Regional Rapid Transit Project. before I start, Brian, I don't know if you wanted to make any introductions while I pull up.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Just to kind of tee off the discussion, at the February board meeting, we sought approval for the locally preferred alternative for the RRT. The board did not select an LPA. Instead, they directed staff to develop an express bus and express lane alternative that was based on a 2015 express bus study. This ask was made frankly to address concerns and criticisms expressed about the RRT by Hillsborough County. WSP has been diligently working on this alternative since then. We will be presenting the information you're about to see at the board meeting next week. While we're not expecting a decision to be made about the LPA at next week's meeting, we do need to get direction from the board on what direction are we going with this project. Is it going to be the RRT, meaning service in a dedicated bus shoulder lane? Is it going to be an express bus route and express lane option instead? Is it going to be some hybrid of RRT and express bus? We need to get direction on that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Scott and he'll update you on what he's been doing since the February board meeting.
Thank you, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, trying to wrap up what we call our milestone 3, which is getting that locally preferred alternative, or like Brian mentioned, getting direction from the board as to where we go next. Just like Brian mentioned, this is what we recommended from a technical perspective to be the locally preferred alternative in February, which is those freeway dedicated BRT lanes in purple in Pinellas through Hillsborough and into Pasco County. But the board had asked us to do an additional comparison and look at that express bus service. So we've done that, and we got access to the data from the 2015 study, and started first by comparing the information, and the goal of bringing that recommendation sort of up to speed in terms of current data, so we can make an apples to apples comparison between the recommended locally preferred alternative and that express bus service. So the 2015 study looked at express bus in the entirety of the express lanes, which at that point in time was TBX. A lot has changed since then. Obviously, where FDOT's putting forth their TB Next program. And the original TBX did have express lanes north of downtown Tampa, which is no longer part of the program. So you'll see that we're really not considering any sort of express lanes north of downtown Tampa to be consistent with the current FDOT program. Obviously, the data that was used in 2015 is a little bit out of date, so we wanted to get that up to speed. And actually, the model that was used in 2015 was the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Model that we used to estimate ridership forecasts. Since then, the federal government has come out with guidance and strongly recommends using what they call their STOPS model, which is simplified trips on project software. And so we, of course, are honoring that recommendation. Obviously, ultimately, we'd hope that the Federal Transit Administration is our ultimate audience for this project. So all the numbers that I'm going to show you here this afternoon is all information coming from that STOPS model in terms of how it's forecasting ridership. And the basis is all our local socioeconomic data. So that's our local jobs and population forecasts that are coming directly from each one of our area NPOs. So we actually developed 3 alternatives to conduct this comparison. We have 2 alternatives, 6A and 6B, which is that express bus service. The only real difference between the 2 is what we do at West Shore. So think of coming from downtown St. Pete heading towards Tampa. When you come across our Howard Franklin Bridge, there is an opportunity to exit the express lanes, get into general traffic, and then actually exit the interstate if at West Shore we want a station that's in West Shore at street level. So we'd have to get all the way out of the interstate, make that connection. And then unfortunately, the way the highway express lanes are designed, we wouldn't actually be able to get back into the express lanes in West Shore. We'd have to go back into mixed traffic all the way to downtown Tampa. So that's 6A. So express lanes from Pinellas, cross the bridge, and then mixed traffic all the way up to Pasco. Now, the original intent for that 2015 study was to use as much express lanes as possible. So we wanted to honor that intent, that original recommendation. And, in the current TBNX program, there are express lanes recommendations from St. Pete all the way to Tampa. To accommodate that, we would still need to invest in the West Shore Intermodal Center, which would allow us to have that platform that would be in the interstate median with a walkway over to that intermodal center. And we could slip out of the express lanes, dock at that boarding station, at that station, inline station, and then slip back into the express lanes. So that 6B is more costly because it would assume those costs for all that infrastructure in West Shore, but you could use the express lanes all the way from St. Pete to Tampa. So that's 6B. Now, 7 is basically exactly the same as the recommended locally preferred alternative with the dedicated lanes. But keep in mind that recommendation from February had 13 total stations, where the Express 2015 Express Bus Survey or Study recommendation only had 6 stations. So we took the same alignment from the RRT recommendation, but instead of 13 stations, we did 6 stations. So 6A, express bus and express lanes to West Shore, and then mixed traffic the rest of the way. 6B, express bus and express lanes all the way through downtown Tampa, and then in mixed traffic up to Pasco. And 7 is basically the RRT, but with 6 stations, not with 13. So really what that gives us is, because a lot of the conversation that's occurring both at this committee and of course at the board has been, what is the benefits of the dedicated lane versus using just the express lanes and doing express bus service. So we're able to make that apples to apples comparison with the data that we've just hot off the presses that we've been working so hard on this last month. And then the other comparison is just that, the RRT had 13 stations where the 2015 study had 6 stations. So what are the benefits of those two different approaches? What's the value of 13 stations versus 6? So the first I'm going to go through is the alignment. Again, this is just a map of what I described. So 6A, you get the express lanes to the Howard Franklin Bridge. 6B, you get the express lanes all the way to downtown Tampa. And then 7 is the dedicated lanes with 6 stations. So we have been presenting ridership information for the RRT always in terms of what we could get today, which is 2020. And that is what's required by FTA. So that's why we've always talked in terms of ridership projections in that manner. But for this comparison, we wanted to look at 2020. We wanted to look at 2030, which is what we think might be a good opening year for this project, as well as 2045, which is equivalent to the MPO's long-range transportation plan. And you can see the daily boardings here. When you look at the dedicated lanes up here on top at 7 versus the express lanes, you do see a difference in the amount of daily boardings that we're getting between the express lanes and the dedicated lanes. In 2020, we're at about 1,800 riders with the dedicated lanes with 6 stations compared to, just over 700 or, 660 on the 2 express bus services. And then you can see its growth over each time period as you move towards 2030 and 2045. But what you'll notice is there's a pretty substantial increase in growth in how people are using the dedicated lanes, especially when we start looking out to 2045, with a marked increase, almost 400% growth in the usage of the project when you get out to 2045, which logically makes a lot of sense, because now you're talking about 25 years from now and the amount of congestion we anticipate to be in the interstates, and by having a dedicated lane, you're getting that time certainty. So that project just becomes that much more attractive to people who would, find a benefit in using it. We did look at the travel times when we compare the two. So I apologize. This is kind of a busy slide, but I'll walk you through it. When you look at the top row, this is what we think travel time will be between Wesley Chapel and downtown St. Pete in 2045. We looked at what the travel times for the existing bus service might be. So the closest we can get to replicating this corridor with current service is taking PSTA Route 52 from St. Pete, transfer to 300X, that gets you to downtown Tampa. And then from Wesley Chapel, the 275LX that's Hart's running down to downtown Tampa. put those two services together, you're looking at over 177 minutes one way to go all the way from Wesley Chapel to St. Pete. So that's an extensive amount of time. Obviously, not necessarily what somebody would take to go back and forth to work. When we add the dedicated lanes, so alternative 3 is that original LPA recommendation with 13 stations. You can see we get a great travel time savings, 81 minutes compared to local transit service. And then when you go down to the 6 stations using the dedicated lanes, you get even more. You get another 20 minutes or so of increased travel time savings. Again, that's, we are eliminating 7 stations, and a lot of those stations we had were actually off the interstate. So we do lose time by getting off and back onto the interstate. However, the express bus and express lanes, and there's a lot of value there. I mean, you are getting a really good time savings, even with just using the express lanes as they're proposed by FDOT. You can see the advantage there, 96 to 90 minutes, and really that 6-minute difference in time savings is just the fact that between West Shore and downtown Tampa, you'd be in mixed traffic versus those express lanes. So all 3 of those alternatives do a really great job in terms of moving people, especially when you compare it to future local transit service. We also got into the data and started looking at how people are actually using the project in each one of these different alternatives. Where are people getting on? Where are people getting off? The top row, we looked at the amount of folks who are crossing county lines. And you can see that here. So external trips are in light blue. So that means somebody's getting on in one county, but taking it to another county. The gold is internal. When we look at just the express lanes, definitely a regional project, 60-40 mix. I mean, you got 60% of the folks who are crossing county lines, clearly what we want the project to do. And when we look at what happens when you add the dedicated lanes, you do see a shift, 45 external to 55 internal. And it's not that you're losing any of those cross-county trips, they're still there. We just see an increased activity in Hillsborough County because of the dedicated lanes, and that's what's skewing those percentages. And you can really see that at the bottom of that graph here in the boarding activity. Light blue is Pinellas, gold is Pasco, dark blue is Hillsborough. With the express lanes, 60% of usage in Hillsborough County, but then you go up by 11 percentage points when you add a dedicated lane. So that's really what's driving the difference in the external versus internal trips. So same conversation, but now we're comparing 13 stations to 6 stations. And you can see here, again, we're kind of using the original LPA, the dedicated lanes, as the basis. But again, the point here is not to have a conversation necessarily about the alignment, but what's the benefit of 13 stations versus 6 stations? So we looked at the 2045 boardings for the 13 stations, and we're about 13,000 riders per day with the 13 stations. And you do see a marked drop in total ridership when you go down to the 6 stations. What personally I found, I know I'm sure this is probably not exciting to most, but to me I found really fascinating was I really anticipated going into this exercise that when we dropped those 7 stations, we would see a redistribution of the ridership to those, what I call the big 6, the big activity centers, St. Pete, West Shore, downtown Tampa, Wesley Chapel, USF. And unfortunately, what seems to be happening is you see some readjustment when you go to the 6 stations alone, but some of those neighborhoods and those communities that are being served by the stations that we're dropping just aren't using the project anymore. So that was a little disconcerting. I'd hope to see some of that trips, some of those riderships being reassigned or, moving to the intermodal centers. And unfortunately, in some cases, when we drop a station, we're just no longer providing a good benefit for those folks in that neighborhood. Same sort of diagram that I did for the alignment, but now we're comparing 6 to 13 stations. When you look at just the 6 stations, you got a 45-55 split. 45% of folks are crossing county lines. Again, a great regional project. You can see the level of activity by county. But what was also really interesting is that when we look at the 13 stations, again, we're seeing this, a significant increase in activity in Hillsborough County. So again, those cross-county trips are not going away, but we're seeing a lot more usage in Hillsborough County, and those tend to be internal trips. So at the board level, we've had conversations about making sure this project doesn't compete with local services. And the way I personally interpret this information is that, you know, it looks like at 13 stations, we may be doing a little bit of that, or we might be competing a little bit with local service. So I think that's an opportunity to make some refinements and maybe have a conversation around, you know, is it 6 stations? I'm not sure. I think we need a few more stations than that, but it appears that maybe 13 stations is too much. So that's just something we're kind of keeping an eye on as we move forward. When we do go from 6 stations, which the 13 is in blue and the 6 is in gold, because we're dropping 7 stations, we do lose access to about 100,000 jobs, which is significant. I mean, that's notable for sure. We lose about half our transit dependent population. With the 13 stations, we've got about 50,000 households that we're serving, and it drops down to 28 when we go to 6 stations. And that's because for the most part, the median income at those major activity centers tends to be higher, and some of the stations that we're removing were lower income neighborhoods or neighborhoods that have folks that really rely on transit. So that you're seeing sort of the impact there going from 13 to 6. One of the conversations that did come up in February, specifically Mayor Kreisman asked the question or made the request to evaluate the convertibility. So the concept is, if you start with an express service now, can you at some later point convert back to the original recommendation of those dedicated lanes? We've had opportunity to coordinate with District 7 and spoke to Secretary Gwynn. He felt very confident that if you did express bus service in the near term, especially in Pinellas and north of downtown Tampa, where we're using the outside shoulders, that they plan on leaving that wider shoulder there as part of TB Next, whether or not this project goes forward. So you could do express bus service and convert it at some later point. The only nuance to that is between West Shore and downtown Tampa. Is by far the most expensive part of the project in terms of infrastructure. And the goal originally was to have the transit project be built as part of the highway updates or the highway program. So if you were to use express bus service now and convert to that dedicated lane at some point in the future, you wouldn't get that advantage of having one construction effort or one construction period for both projects, the highway and the transit. So there probably would be some additional cost incurred to the transit project if we went at a later time than the TB Next program. But the convertibility is still an option. It just may be slightly more costly between West Shore and downtown Tampa. And that's the description of exactly what I just said. Apologies, I guess I was getting ahead of myself a little bit. So we're looking to bring this information to the board next week and have a discussion with them. This is just a recap of some of the things I've mentioned. You can see the total cost estimates, and again in 2020 dollars across the 4 different alternatives. So 6A is the express bus service to just the other side of the Howard Franklin Bridge. Really very minimal cost. I mean, really, you're just talking about buying buses and maybe a couple of shelters and the systems and the alike services. You can see the difference when we add the West Shore Intermodal Center. That's both the station and the infrastructure to allow the transit service to exit the express lanes and get back in. So there's a significant cost there. And then, of course, the 2 dedicated lanes, the 6 station versus the 3 stations. And again, the performance and ridership and the job served and transit dependent served as well. On the cost side, again, we looked at cost per trip. You can see the same numbers there. But one thing to note is, the original intent for this project was to seek competitive, that competitive Federal Transit Administration grant or the Capital Investment Grant Program. And if the project is not federalized, so we're trying to seek those FTA dollars, but there are other ways to federalize this project, whether it's working with the NPOs or what have you. But if the project isn't federalized, unfortunately, the state contribution is minimized. They can only really contribute up to about 12.5%, putting a lot of pressure on the, in terms of cost onto the local agencies. And you can see the impact here. That's the percentages for both express lanes, assuming it's not federalized, getting 0% from the federal government, and the percentages here, and its impact to the cost. Whereas the dedicated lanes have the potential to compete for those federal dollars, which we're conservatively assuming could share 50% of the cost burden. But we continue to hear great things from the Biden administration. Hopefully, there's some opportunities where maybe you could even look at an application that has upwards of 80% of a Fed contribution for the project, which just makes it that much easier to, construct and to build this project in terms of the local commitment. So just like Brian mentioned, we're looking for some direction from the board. Do we want to talk about stations and the right number of stations, making some adjustments there? Do we want to, go the express service or the dedicated service or some combination there within? And again, we just want to present the facts and the data as we're pulling it from the model, and then let the board sort of give us their opinions on which way to go. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Tremendous amount of data, a lot of good information there. Let me open it up to see if there are questions from the committee, but let me just add that I understand Scott is going to take this to the board and ask them for guidance. We are not today in a position to take any action, but this would be an opportunity for any of our committee members to make comments that they would like me to relay on behalf of the committee at the board meeting. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Lynn Gruber-White has her hand raised.
Lynn, will be recognized.
Thank you very much. I understand that the board's concern is about the cost of this project. But I think that one of the things that we need to stand behind is that less stations equals less ridership. And that is the exact opposite of what we are trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve higher ridership. And this comes down to being about convenience. And we need to make public transportation convenient for people who ride it. To take away and to limit the number of stations and to show such a huge decrease in ridership, I somehow want the board to understand that. And as far as competition with local agencies, overwhelmingly, an express service, a TBARTA service, is actually going to feed into and increase the ridership of local agencies, not take away from ridership of local agencies. And then my final thought is federal dollars come from serving the underserved population. Therefore, if we take away stations that are directly impacting underserved populations, we're walking away from federal dollars, plain and simple. Those are my thoughts. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Other comments or questions of Scott's presentation?
Bill Johnson and then Karen Mullins.
Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, my thoughts are very similar to Lynn's. I'm looking at the cost per trip, and alternative 3 with the more stations really is substantially more expensive than the express bus. And is that primarily due to the construction of the stations?
It's both the construction of the stations, the investment in the dedicated alignment. And we also have in that alternative 3, multiple operating routes, because remember, we're getting on and off the interstate, and every time we get off, we lose a little bit of time. So we were offsetting that to give people, the fastest trip possible by having a layered route approach, where we had, two different services coming from Pinellas, two different services coming from Wesley Chapel, all kind of meeting up in the middle at Tampa. And of course, that means more vehicles and more drivers, so there's a little bit higher operating cost as well.
So there'd be a red line and a blue line or something like that that
Correct.
wouldn't stop at all,
That's correct.
all of them. And, okay. I see that as a real challenge of this environment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Karen
Um,
Mullins, and then I think Josh Frank as well.
Karen, you're recognized.
Karen, are you there? She's unmuted. Karen
Yeah,
Mullins?
sorry, my internet's going in and out. I just wanted to ask, this, I love the presentation. How does it compare to the survey that we just got shown? Are the numbers and what we're seeing consistent? And the other thing is what Lynn said, there's federal dollars out there. We need to capitalize on it. We need to make our people, our constituents, our citizens realize that this is there, and that's it.
Karen, I think we lost the last part of your comment there. Would you mind repeating the last part?
Say,
Might have to come back to her later. I think she's
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
frozen. I will just start, Scott, because she asked about the survey. The survey did not ask specifically about bus rapid transit, and it certainly didn't ask specifically about any of these alignments. So it's kind of hard to say, did it line up? Certainly people are saying, hey, there should be an investment, but I think that might be a leap to say that this survey shows people want us to invest specifically in this project. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Scott, you want to add to it?
No, I would agree with Chris's assumption. I mean, obviously from the survey, regional transit is important, but what is the right investment? We're still trying to figure that out.
Sure.
I think
Well,
Josh Frank would be next.
Josh, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Scott, for the presentation. It's great to keep getting updates on these. I think, as difficult as some of these questions can be, and I know mine have been, I really appreciate the amount of effort you've gone to answer them in your presentations. So I just want to say, I think Lynn's comments earlier, I want to sort of follow up on that because I think she was onto something, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think, one thing I've always felt about this project from the beginning is that it's very supplemental as opposed to, leading a transit effort regionally. I think it's something that will support potentially transit that each county is going to run independently that serves more people, more households, more jobs, et cetera. So, I think from that perspective, I think express bus service, I've always been very dubious about the TOD potential associated with it. Obviously, the less stations you have, the less potential you have for TOD around them as well. So, I think you're right in that if you were to look at this objectively, 6 stations is probably too few. And I would like to see if that was maybe 8 or 10 or wherever, that those are chosen to be, again, more supplemental, overlapping with greater routes that have higher ridership. One thing I think we still maybe haven't seen is how this compares in terms of projections with current transit systems that we have in operation right now. So to put it in perspective, how does this route compare against 275 LX, which is somewhat similar? How does it compare in terms of ridership with the projections for the St. Pete BRT, which is going to be truly dedicated? So I think there's some comparisons there to just give us maybe a little bit of context.
Okay.
And then the last thing I'll say is, I think as we look at that judgment on the spectrum between cost benefit at 6 stations or 13 stations and ridership projections associated with those, I think at the same time, there may be a point where this project doesn't meet a cost benefit that is good enough. The 6 stations with less than 5,000 riders a day is pretty weak. And I would expect, as a first foray into regional transit service from this board and from TBARTA in general, we should shoot for something that maybe is better than that, especially considering the amount of federal dollars that are out there, as was mentioned. So, I think it's not there yet for me. And I think but Bill, Chair, if you wouldn't mind maybe including this in skepticism in some of your reports to the board. I just think from my perspective and from my constituents, Hillsborough County's perspective, this project's not there yet for us. So I appreciate it though, nonetheless. Thanks.
So noted. Chris, Scott, did you want to comment on any of that? Then
No,
I'll
great
go to
points.
Bob.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Bob Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Lynn, great comments. And certainly, as Josh pointed out, this is a great time to go after federal dollars. I mean, they are available probably more so than at any other time in our history. Having sat myself at the February board meeting, will this dog hunt? I mean, I'm not sure I really understand the motivation of some of the board commissioners in not aligning themselves with regional thought. I mean, I would even say, no, I won't say it, but it's a good regional plan. Is it competitive? Well, as Lynn pointed out, no, you're going to get more ridership. So is it too costly? No, not really. So what really is the agenda item that's driving the negative comments relative to this plan? And then as my final question, I would ask, I didn't see a time frame for 6A, B, 7, 3, where they would be completed. In other words, how fast can you get this stuff done? Because that may be one of the key decision makers. And I thank you for your presentation, because I thought you did an outstanding job addressing the comparison between 2015, which is what, 6 years ago, and we're still no shovels in the ground, Yeah, let's pick it up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bob. Scott, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I cannot answer the first part of your question. We'll have to touch base after next week's meeting. We'll see where it goes. But your question about opening. So if we're looking at express bus service in the express lanes, or even the dedicated lanes, that's really all contingent on TB Next. And TB Next being in place and being open for business, which we're really, roughly speaking, we're talking 2030.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dave Goodwin is next.
Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott, I just have a couple of questions. Some are a little bit technical, maybe mundane. Slide 12, it calculates travel time. My question is, do any of those calculations include the first and last mile issues that are associated with the transit project? I'll go ahead and ask all the questions. You can answer them complete or not. We talked about, you projected out to 2045 for ridership. One of the sites is on the Tropicana Field. One of the stops is on the Tropicana Field site. And I heard, I think Josh talked about TOD opportunities, and maybe the issue or the lack thereof of some of these station locations. How is that calculated, that future development, that opportunity for TOD close to these stations being calculated into this project? And specifically, what does the study say about the Trop site? Is it still a parking lot in the baseball stadium, or has it been developed? That kind of thing. Here's a real minor issue. It's an edit. Slide 17 has three items there, including the median income comparison. That on the far right, it has a different scale than the other two. So it makes like the median income is double versus just $4,000 difference. Maybe you want to suggestion. And last, piggybacking on some of the questions about or comments about the federal funding opportunity here, you've got cost per rider. Maybe we should break that down and show local cost per rider, because obviously when the federal money is able to be injected, it can change that local cost per rider dramatically. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Scott?
Sure. Hi, Dave. It's good to see you again. To your first question about the first and last mile, no, we didn't include the travel time for first and last mile. It is literally going from the stations along the corridor from St. Pete to Wesley Chapel. So it would include time of getting to your ultimate destination or transferring to local transit. As far as the TROP site, so we use the adopted socioeconomic data from the NPO, the jobs and pop forecast. And I don't believe that includes the redevelopment at the TROP site. So no, our ridership does not take account for that. And quite honestly, none of our ridership, we were conservative all the way through. We've never done an additional analysis of the benefits of TOD at these stations and how that might impact ridership. We're just using the base jobs and population data and running that out and instead of trying to make assumptions as to what the economic development opportunities could be at stations. So in theory, if you saw a lot of growth around these station areas, the ridership would increase even more than what we're showing here, but we're just kind of using that baseline. Thank you about the median. I'll fix that. I blame Word for that, so I'll fix that. And then yeah, let me talk to TBARTA staff. I think we can certainly talk about the cost breakdown per trip. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Rob Circu is up.
Rob, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick comments. First, great presentation. Appreciate the work and everything that went into that. And I think one of the keys, probably most everybody agree with, the number, if you have it, the number of stops and where's the happy medium to that is what's the local support for transition. But if you go to 10 and the 3 that are left out is some of that big drop because there's not a good plan in place to get them from the one that is still on there to the one that's dropped. So some of that local support in those may actually show that ridership go up. If you don't know, if I don't know how to get from A to B conveniently, I'm just going to stick with driving my own vehicle. But if I'm provided something local that gets me there quickly or some, parking, that type of stuff that makes it better, that may kind of offset some of those, at least in the short term, with the longer term of being able to add some of those stops back in down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the connections between local transit and this service, we worked with each of the staff from the 3 transit agencies, and at least in the model, made alterations to that local transit network so that it connects, so that you do have good transfer opportunities. But you're right. I mean, I was surprised when I didn't see sort of not wholesale readjustment of ridership when we went to the 6, but I definitely expected more, and that did concern me a little bit. It seems like that, at least the 6 stations, it's a distance a little bit too far for folks, and so maybe by finding some sort of sweet spot in between, we can both keep the service very regional, but then make sure that people have an opportunity to connect. So to be determined, I suppose.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Thank you, Rob. Other questions?
I see no one else.
I only would make a couple of comments. One, I think Scott has correctly identified some pushback that he's gotten from one or more of the board members, that the plan for the 13 stations seem to be competitive with the local service, or at least plans that local services are making. So and I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know that Scott's taken a lot of time to analyze it and is reflecting that. I think Rob Cirque is probably right that 6 stations may be a bit thin to pick up the ridership that we need. But I also would like to express my own view that this is intended to be a regional service. It is not a local service. It's not to hop on the RRT and go a short distance, whatever that is, whatever county it's in. So it's going to be an interesting board discussion. And Scott, let me ask you if you are making any recommendations to the board at your upcoming presentation, or are you going to simply seek their guidance and digest it and then come back with a recommendation? What's your plan?
The latter. So we want to make sure that, we able to present the information objectively, allow the board to, digest it, discuss it, give us some direction. We're more than happy to go back to the lab, as it were, and do some more work and come back with a recommendation in May. I think that's the approach.
Okay. And Scott, is any of this information you've presented today contingent upon the construction of the West Shore interchange?
The way we're looking at our opening year and maintaining that 2030 opening year time horizon really accounts for the West Shore interchange being complete. So,
okay, because it's been pushed back, as you know, 2 years, and hopefully DOT can find the money to at least get construction started before 2024. Okay.
Yeah, and according, at least, and again, I don't want to speak for FDOT, but the latest schedule that I saw for TB Next, even with pushing the State Route 60 interchange back a couple of years, would still likely be open by that 2030 timeframe. So that's why we've been targeting it. It includes the impact of the pandemic's decrease in state funding.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's a very Did I hear a comment?
Couple more comments. I know Brian has raised his hand. I don't know if you want to jump in first with Brian Passero, then Karen Mullins, and Bill Johnson would like to.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was just going to add some commentary. Really, the reason why Scott was asked to go look at the express bus alternative was really because it became clear that Hillsborough County was not going to support what staff had recommended as the LPA, which was alternative 3. So really, we're doing this because we have to find out what is going to be acceptable to Hillsborough County. Because unfortunately, the reality is without Hillsborough County support, this project is going nowhere. So we're coming back to the board saying we did what you asked. We looked at an express bus and express lane option. Is that palatable to Hillsborough County? If it's not, I don't know where we go from here. But so we're unlike February, where in February staff came to the board with a staff recommendation of an LPA. At next week's meeting, the approach is more going to be, we just need direction on where are we going. Are we sticking with the RRT? Are we going an express bus and express lane route, some hybrid of the two? We as staff have to know what direction are we headed.
That's fair. Karen Mullins?
Yeah, sorry for my carrier is having difficulty today. I want to can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I want to reiterate what Bill said about the number of stops versus the number of stops. I am a former PSTA bus driver doing local routes as well as the express routes. And I can tell you there's a vast difference between the 300X and the 100X. The 100X having more stops is a lot slower. The 300X with limited stops, a lot quicker. So we need to take that in consideration. And I know I heard Scott say that those are the handoffs. I was listening to Lynn. Yes, we want to service as many people, but if you're gonna have a slow service, we can't offer them the service that we want to put out there. Thank you.
Okay, Karen, thank you. Appreciate you coming back with your thoughts. Anyone else have
You
comments?
have several people. I'd start with, I think Bill Johnson's next in the queue.
Bill, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted, Bill. You're
Bill
muted.
Johnson.
The
Hey.
thing that I'm wondering about is if this isn't going to be here until 10 years from now, 2030, and with a huge cost, I'm not sure that the region is going to be supporting TBARTA for that long with such a big cost, with somewhat limited. I mean, it's a big benefit to the people that are going to use it, but the ridership is not what I thought it could be. And maybe we should be investing these costs in local service and just the van pools and the regional TD. Thank you.
Okay.
Rich Malcolm next.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I agree with our chairman that this is a regional project, and I concur with Lynn's comments that the more stations are better than less, and I want to go on record for stating that.
Okay, thanks, Rich.
I do see a Bob Widmer.
Bob?
Bob, you're muted.
Bob, you're still muted.
I'll get him unmuted. Hang on a second.
Okay.
I can't unmute Bob, but I will say Rick Richmond's next.
Okay, I'm here.
Oh, Bob's here. Good.
I don't know how you got, and anyhow, one of the statements made at the February meeting, and I believe I'm quoting it correctly, was, we have that already. I would like your response to that, because when I look at the HART system map of January 21, they have 4 limited express routes and 3 express routes, but they don't cover anywhere near what the 41-mile plan for the LPA is. What is your comment?
To me directly, Bob?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this project was to tie the 3 counties together in some sort of meaningful way. When you have the individual transit agencies trying to develop their express services, their mission is to serve the county in which they reside. So, their focus is, service in Pinellas or service in Hillsborough. So you're obviously not going to get a project that, unifies 3 counties like what the mission or the objective was for TBARTA. But yeah,
Thank
other
you.
than that, I'm not quite sure how to answer.
No, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Who else is queued up?
Rick Richmond would be next.
Rick, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So a great discussion, a lot of great points, and Lynn, right on point with you starting us off, because I agree with everything you've said. And I wasn't going to chime in, but when I hear, a project like this competing for local service, that means people are making a decision to use another service that may be more beneficial. That's how I read it, right? More efficiently. And as a resident of Hillsborough County, I'm frustrated to hear that the point is to move people efficiently. I know there's balances between a regional and a local, but when the regional can provide a lift and enable more ridership, it's a win for everybody. And I appreciate the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the potential for ridership is not a fixed number. It's going to be static, and one must assume it'll continue to grow as time goes on. Chris, anyone else in the queue?
You have 2 more. We have Lynn, Gruber Wright, and then Leo.
Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm gonna show myself for who I am. Is it HART that is pushing back at us, or is it Hillsborough politicians who are pushing back at us? And there's a difference in how you deal with the 2 camps. Can somebody answer that?
I don't know if I want to.
Scott,
I'll take it. It's Hillsborough Commission.
Okay, so it's the politicians. It's not Hart itself. So how do we network with Hart to have them smooth the way for this with their politicians? Because the thing is that there is no question that a regional service feeds local service. It does not take away from local service, it feeds local service. And the more that people can use public transportation efficiently, the more all public transportation is going to get used.
So we work with Hart staff routinely. Actually, we're meeting with them tomorrow. They're part of our executive team. They're part of the core group that we go to as a sounding board, and that's been providing us direction throughout the entirety of the project. So we have been coordinating very closely with Hart staff.
Well, I think that somehow, some way, we need to find an initiative and work with somebody to educate Hillsborough politicians. Because if that's where the stumbling block is, we got to get beyond the stumbling block. Just my opinion.
Thank you, Lynn. And I would just add to that, and to be very open, certainly some of us have watched the board meetings. Commissioner Pat Kemp has been the most outspoken of the objectors to the TBARTA plan. And she is the one that has expressed the competitive factor of this plan competing with Hart. I have not gotten any feedback from the Hart staff or even the Hart board members either way, whether they support or have problems with this plan. So Lynn, that's what little bit of light I can shed on your question.
Bill, I know Brian works very closely with Hart and would like the floor.
Please.
I was just going to add that, we have had Scott and David, they have met one-on-one multiple times with members of the Hillsborough County Commission. So we are having these conversations. I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
Leo,
Whitmer,
Leo would be next, and then Bob, I believe. Leo's in the queue.
go ahead.
Y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I don't have anything earth-shattering to add. I think everyone's pretty exasperated at this point, and understandably so. I'm not surprised, though, that we're getting pushback from Hillsborough on the number of stops. I apologize that I've had to jump in and out of the meeting today, but just for my quick edification, the reduction of the 13 stops to 6, I assume that's mostly in Hillsborough, if not entirely.
No, we did do, it's actually in Pinellas and Hillsborough, but yes, the majority of those tend to be in Hillsborough County, correct?
Right, and I to me, that makes a certain amount of sense from a regional perspective, right? And what I mean by that is, looking at some of the survey data that we have in the packet here today, Hillsborough is the population center as well as the business center, right? So it's got to be about getting people from the other counties, typically, by and large, into Hillsborough and back, obviously, right? I mean, ridership is going to be based on jobs primarily, and so 6 is too few, right? I think we can all agree on that. I certainly agree with that, but I don't think it's misguided to say let's find 3 or 4 key feed points, where we could have essentially like a multi-service station, right, where you can get off TBARTA and get on Hart and get to your job, right? I mean, I think that's the goal here. And I don't know, I may be overstepping my boundaries here a bit, and certainly out of my depth. But if this project is kind of refocused a little bit as this is the first phase of building a line or a system that really reaches out into the other counties that aren't included on this line, certainly still focusing on Pasco and Pinellas, right, as population centers. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. So again, I guess just to reiterate, I mean, I'm not terribly surprised by Hillsborough. I think they've gone about it rather ham-handedly, right? But I think there is something to say for what they're doing, with the caveat that I understand that, Scott, you've done a tremendous amount of work and research into this, and I'm sure that the stops that they are proposing to axe are there for a reason, right? Because they're underserved communities, because of all the other reasons. But I keep coming back to the fact that this does need to be a regional service, and kind of the key levers that are available to us.
Thank you, Lenore. Bob Whitmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I had never intended to bring up a name, but since you have outed, I have articles from 2018 from the Tampa Bay Times that quotes the young lady: "Express buses are fine, but this simply isn't the transformative project we need now," talking about BRT. And she's pushing for a passenger rail system, and she has no use for interstate shoulders. And she also is supporting Brandis SB 1130 for the dissolution of TBARTA. So I don't think this is a small play here, in other words, and apologize for all this information, but it's in the public record. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. David Goodwin, do you have your hand up?
I do. Thank you, Chairman. Just based on some of the comments about, we're looking at 13 stations or 6 stations, and is there, Scott, I don't know, you may have analyzed this to death. Maybe it's 8, 9, or 10 stations, some sort of a compromise that reduces those perceived conflicts, real or perceived, with the local transit service in Hillsborough County. And maybe the focus ought to be on where there's some TOD opportunities associated with the regional system. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Let me take one more comment. Karen Mullins, your hand is up.
Karen, you're muted. You're muted. Unmute her.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry. The conversation from the Hillsborough commissioner has been that there are going to be redundancies. Not that they were competing, it's that there are redundancies in the regional rapid transit and HART. The other portion of it was that she wants to get on CXX rail and take us off the interstate, completely off the interstate. So it's not as cut and dry. And yes, she is by far, and she's not the only county commissioner who is backing Brandis's bill. So thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Good information. Well, I think we've had a great discussion. I think we spent a fair amount of time on this. I'll certainly relay some specifics and the general sense of the committee to the board when I give them our report. But with the committee's permission, I'd like to move on our agenda to the next item. And that really is members' interest. So this is the point at which we ask members to suggest topics for future agendas, not necessarily to get into a lengthy discussion of it. Anybody have a suggestion or something they want to raise under members' interest? Karen Mullins, I see your hand is up.
I have always, and I've asked Commissioner personally to have a full, she seems to be stuck on the CSX and has a idea. Is it possible to get a memo from her outlining what she sees that we're not seeing? That's all I'm asking. If we're still in business at the next meeting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a fair question. You can. I'm going to relay it to the staff and see if they're willing to make that request. If they would like it to come from me, I'm happy to make it on behalf of this committee. Okay. Anything else under members' interests? And let me apologize for not wrapping up the last session by thanking Scott Pringle again for bringing us a an information-filled presentation.
Yeah.
Lots of good information there, more than I could digest. But thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is a discussion of our bylaw revisions. We were asked to bring this item before the committee. The bylaws were sent out, were available in your information packet. Many of the changes have been fine tuning of them. I would simply add that I ask that there be a mission or a purpose statement added to the bylaws of this committee. So that's a new section which stated the purpose of the committee. Are there any questions or comments or any objections to the bylaws as they've been revised? They will go from here to legal counsel, I think, and then they'll go to the full board. Is that right, Chris Shaddock?
I believe so. I'd probably defer to Jennifer on the procedure for that, but I believe that is the case.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
And Bill Johnson has his hand up.
Bill Johnson, go ahead. You're muted, Bill.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
I look at the bylaws and I kind of wonder, is there a way that we could become more effective in representing the communities that we serve? And I don't know whether staff might have some suggestions as to how we structure that outreach. And then, I used to attend all the board meetings and now I'm kind of missing that. And I just feel like I'm not as connected as I used to be. And I'd be open to suggestions from anybody else on the committee. Or maybe just brainstorming amongst us as to what you do to reach out. And I don't know if that's actually a bylaw question, but I throw it out here for some thoughts.
Good. Thank you, Bill. I think that's a great question. I think it's part of what we raised at our last meeting as to how can we more effectively represent our various constituencies and the counties that we represent on this committee. I'm certainly open to comments from staff if they want to make some, or if they want to come back at the next meeting with some suggestions. Any thoughts?
Rich Balcom would like the floor.
Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, to piggyback on Bill's comment, and I did want to jump in when you were talking about members' interest. And as long as I've been involved with this TBARTA and its initiative since 2007, I know that we always have a representation at the board meeting from our chairman, but I've never seen any representation from the board itself coming to CAC. And I think there'd be some value in that, whether it's the chairman or an appointed individual that would come and be at our meeting, maybe once every quarter, or at least some interaction with us. I think also would make us feel a little more connected. Everyone that sits on this committee, we've never had any as long as I can recall, we've never had any representation from the board sitting and talking to us at our committee meeting.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's a very good point, and I think we need to find a way to better connect with the board. And I'm certainly willing to invite or to ask Chairman Holton if he would like to find a mechanism to have someone give a board report and come and meet with us at a future meeting. Anyone from the staff want to comment on that idea? Or just see where it goes? Okay. All right. Is there any discussion on the revisions to the bylaws? If there are no suggested changes, we will pass them along to legal counsel for review. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they'll go to the full TBARTA board for ratification. Hearing none, we will close that item on the agenda. The next item is I wanted to get a brief update on the legislative activity as it relates to TBARTA. Brian, Brian Passero, you're going to give us that one.
Sure, I'd be glad to, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
So just a brief update on where things stand with the TBARTA bill, which is Senate Bill 422, the Brandis bill, which is Senate Bill 1130, and the TBARTA appropriation request. So the TBARTA bill, Senate Bill 422, just to recap what's in it in case you didn't know already. The TBARTA bill does a few things. It would remove the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee from TBARTA. It adds a provision allowing the mayors of Tampa and St. Petersburg to designate an alternate to the TBARTA board. It adds a provision that a simple majority of the board shall constitute a quorum. Right now, our statute says 7 members. And it also deletes some outdated text in our statute saying that the board would, by July 1st of 2017, evaluate the abolishment, continuance, modification, or establishment of several committees. That language is out of date, so that language would be deleted from the statute. So where things stand with that bill, it was in committee, it was in community affairs, but it's stalled. At this point, RSA says we're trying to amend the TBARTA bill into another transportation bill. So that's where things stand with that. Senate Bill 1130, the Brandis bill that would eliminate TBARTA by July of 2022. That bill never did get a companion bill in the House. Senator Brandis could always try to get the text amended into another bill. However, our lobbyist RSA thinks that it's probably a dead issue, at least for this session. In regards to the appropriation, late in their session, the Senate did include $1.5 million in their budget process for TBARTA. So far, the House has not included any budget for TBARTA. That'll have to be reconciled between the Senate and the House in the budget process over the next several weeks. And that's pretty much all the information I have at this point.
Okay. Good report, Brian. Thank you. Any questions of Brian? I don't see any hands raised. Bill Johnson.
Bill Johnson.
So is the House companion to 422, is that also stalled?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the legislative update? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the next item on our agenda. Chris Dianudis is going to give us a report on TD Tampa Bay. Chris?
Yes, thank you so much. Just as a reminder, the primary purpose of TD Tampa Bay is to provide trips to the TD community. So I'm just going to give you an idea of what the demand has been. Demand has definitely increased over the 4 months that we have data for. In December, we provided 70 trips. In January, 260 trips. In February, 332 trips. And in March, almost 600 trips, 594 trips. The majority of those trips, 41% are out of Hillsborough County. No surprise there. But what might be a surprise is in March, 26% came out of Pasco County. And the next closest was Pinellas with 25%. The majority of the trips, again, no surprise, are medical and jobs. So I would say about 30% medical and also 30% jobs. Let's see, what else is interesting? Trip length in March is 22 miles, and the trip duration or trip time was 48-minute trip. So Hillsborough County, out of the 594 trips in March, 224 came out of Hillsborough County, 66 were medical, 30 were jobs. And like I said, Pasco was the next highest with 160 out of the almost 600, 34 medical, 62 in jobs. And I'll open it up to questions if anyone has any questions.
Okay, good. Questions of Chris?
Bill Johnson?
Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chris, can you review again the application process for the regional TD program is independent for the application from the local TD programs? And the reason for that was?
That was a requirement of the Commission for the Transportation Disadvantaged that they be separate. And we have the application on TBARTA's website. It's a Google form, so you can fill it out online. You can attach all your backup documentation if there needed to be any documentation and submit it. Or you could print it out and mail it in, or even email it. You can. We've had situations where people will email me their a photo of the form, and then I'll transmit it to people at USERV. They'll take a picture of their photo ID, send that to me. So we've done it a bunch of different ways, but just back to your main question, it was a requirement of the CTD.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up?
Please, go ahead.
Are there different criteria amongst the counties and ours?
Each of, we try to follow whatever the requirement was for each of the counties. So
I'm just wondering where the CTD came from in saying they'd like to have a separate application. Do we know
I
that?
think it's more for just following the documentation. So because USERV, who's providing the service, is sending an invoice to the CTD to in order to be paid. So they want to be able to go back and audit any trips that were made.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Other questions of Chris? I don't see any hands up. Chris Jadek, do you see any?
I do not.
All right. Well, good. Chris, thanks for that report. I'm really glad to see that program is growing. I have one quick question. You said the average trip length was 22 miles. Is that one way or round trip? Because it seemed like a long
That's
distance.
one way. That's a
one way.
trip. Yes, sir.
Interesting. That's pretty valuable service then. Good. Okay. Before we close the meeting, are there specific items, additional items that anyone in the committee would like me to relay to the TBARTA board when I give my report? Any thoughts?
I think Bill wants to speak.
Yes.
I noted in the February meeting, there was a report that the gondola project was going to be coming back. This is more like should have been members' interest, but is there something going on with that? Brian, that looks like he's got a.
Yes, I'm going to be the project manager for that study. We put the project out to bid. We have selected a consultant, SCJ Alliance, and at the board meeting, we will be seeking approval from the board to award the contract to them and get the study rolling.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Anything else that the committee wants me to report to the board at their next meeting? Well, listen, I appreciate this great discussion. We had a lot of ground to cover, and Scott Pringle brought us a very informative report. We had good discussion on that. So I really appreciate everyone's input. Is there any other new business to come before the committee? Seeing no hands and hearing none, thank you again, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.
everybody.
Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.